Today we're going to do a presentation. We're going to be talking about how you talk with friends when they are really struggling with some sort of concern. And they come to you and you're in a place of like, oh gosh, what do I say? So my hope is that today, actually before I say that, let me back up. So if anybody joins us on Zoom, and you have comments or questions, feel free to type those into the chat box, and then I'll answer them at the end because you've been muted. So if you say them out loud, we won't be able to hear you. Okay. And also, so that everybody knows, the session's recorded. So if you want to come back to this, if there's a graphic you wanted, or the video you wanted, or some other key point you wanted in here, it gets posted on our website, so you can always check it out at a later time too. Okay. So my hope is today will be sort of a journey together, which is why I chose the graphic I did for the presentation. And I think it's also symbolic that like when a friend comes to you when they're struggling, that also puts you on a journey together, right? So kind of that's my symbol that I'm kind of hoping to use and weave throughout here. That sometimes this can feel like uncharted territory, but if we kind of stick together, support each other, kind of work together, that can hopefully lead to the best outcomes possible. One thing, since we are going to be having discussion, my hope and my request of you, if you share, is that you not share the names or the stories of someone else. So because this is recorded and posted on the website, we don't want to violate somebody's privacy or their confidentiality. So my hope is that we can kind of focus on, like, if you are talking about a friend who, say, has been struggling with alcohol and drinking lots of alcohol and maybe misusing it, that's kind of the extent of what you share about that person. And then really focusing on, like, here's what my questions are, here's what my struggle has been, or here's what I've tried and has worked and not worked. So you're really focusing on your own experience and your own story instead of that other person's. Does that make sense? Cool. So that you know, I always like to talk a little bit about why I'm here and presenting on this topic. And for me, the biggest reason is because I see a lot of students come to our office, so over at Counseling Services, and say, like, my friend is struggling with X, Y, and Z, and I don't know what to do. And so I think it's an important conversation for us to be having, because we are all going to, at some point in time, if we haven't already, encounter a situation where a friend is struggling with something, or a family member is struggling with something, and they come to us, and we are, like, in the position to try to help and want to help, and sometimes feel like we don't have the tools at the ready to help. So I think it's really important for us to be talking about this. My goal in this is not for us to leave here with, like, here's how I'm going to change my friend's behavior, or here's the advice that's going to make everything all better. But it's really to get some tools, get some skills so you might feel a little bit more prepared, and have some more things in your mind that you're thinking about, so you don't get stuck sort of caught off guard. And I think it's important to know that it's not your responsibility to change your friends' minds or behavior. So we'll talk about that again later, but that's not my goal either, is to help you change their minds. Okay? So that's what brought me here. I'm curious to start with what brought you all here. So where'd the mic go? So if you want to share a little bit about kind of why you're here and kind of what you're hoping to get out of today, just so we kind of know where to start, and maybe also some things that would be helpful for us to add in, or for me to add into the presentation that I didn't think about. So if anyone wants to share. Okay, thank you.
I'm interested in becoming a peer educator, so I feel like having this knowledge of what to do when your friend is in trouble is very important. And I have friends who struggle, and I would like to help them personally as well.
Sure. That makes a lot of sense. I think a lot of what we're talking about is going to be helpful as peer educators. Inevitably, if you start to do presentations like this, people will come to you and ask, they'll say, here's my situation, what should I do? So being prepared for that, and of course, having friends, for sure. We're struggling. Anybody else want to dive in?
I'm here, same reason she is, but also I plan on going into human resources, and I think this is an important thing to be able to do in that field. Just being able to talk to people about what they're struggling with to get a better sense of how they're handling their work environment at the same time.
Sure. That makes a lot of sense. And in human resources, you may also end up with people who are struggling with each other, so figuring out some skills to help navigate those dynamics, definitely.
In addition to peer education and like human resources, the utility of physicians having mental health resources. So I'm pre-medicine, and I feel like in the healthcare field right now, mental health is not addressed as much as it should be in like general checkup situations. And so just beginning the journey today and like understanding how to be accessible and like apply knowledge to friends now, and then that could be built upon in the future. So.
For sure. Yeah. I think a lot of, anytime you're in some sort of helping profession, whether it's medicine or mental health or a whole variety of other ones, you're going to use these skills, you know, even if you're not in a helping profession, like you're going to use these skills with your coworkers and family. And so definitely, hopefully we'll start with building a foundation. So I really appreciate you all sharing. So, cool. Well, and as time goes on, if there are questions that come up or things that you're like, wait, what about this? Or feel free to jump in, stop me, and we'll talk about them. Hi, come on in. So if you want to jump in and kind of sit somewhere around us over here, this is kind of discussion-based. All right. Cool. So, like I said, my plan today is to discuss the concerns you experience when a friend is struggling and comes to you, ways of listening and offering support, and then also some resources so that you know you don't have to figure it all out on your own, right? So that's the plan for today. So we're going to keep having kind of a conversation. And I thought it would be helpful to first talk about just even how you know if someone is struggling. So what are some of the signs that you look for, the signs that you may have noticed in someone who's been struggling before, or things that you want to pay attention to. So does anyone want to get us started with kind of talking about like, oh, here are some things that might be important to pay attention to if somebody's struggling, or that tells you someone's struggling? So, all right. Hi. Do you mind using the mic because we're recording it? So you don't have to say your name or anything, but just that way your voice shows up.
I think one that's kind of important to look at is if they're a really active person and then they go from being really active to kind of not active at all. They want to stay in bed a lot. They don't want to go out. They don't want to socialize. So I think kind of cutting themselves off from friends and family is a sign.
Totally.
What I see most are my friends tweeting sad, kind of stressing things like musical lyrics or pleas. That's what I mainly see.
Yeah, sure. I hadn't even thought about the thing that shows up on social media, right? The tone of what they're posting, especially if that tone has changed from how they used to be. Yeah, totally. So, and I appreciate your point too about like anytime somebody's behavior changes, you know, normally they get up and shower in the morning and go to class and suddenly they're not getting out of bed, and, you know, or they used to be social and now they're totally isolating themselves. Those are definitely things to pay attention to. Sure. Any other ideas? Things that help you know?
I think it's also important to, like, if you have friends, to just be paying attention to what is happening in their life and not necessarily expect that bad things are going to happen as a result of bad things in life happening, but just, like, check up on them and make sure that they are doing okay. So if you know of a friend who, like, just went through a rough breakup, like, make sure that you're checking on them and making sure they are okay and they are getting out of bed, just so that you can be a little bit more proactive instead of like finding it after the fact. So being there for support like during rough times is also important. So.
Yeah, reaching out if you know that stressful things are already going on. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Other ideas, things that might be important to pay attention to?
Substance abuse. And if they're drinking a lot, if they're using new drugs, getting drunk every day, missing tests because they're hungover.
Or, mm-hmm. Yeah, I think using substances is not inherently a problem, but paying attention to like how much, how often, is it affecting like the things that are important to them, or relationships, maybe is it affecting your relationship with them, if you're close. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Any other things that might help you know that you can think of? One other thing that I've thought about, if you want to just switch that off while we're in the in-between, another thing I've thought about that I think comes up a lot on a college campus is eating habits and exercising habits. Both, I mean, I think usually we think about women when we talk about eating and exercise, but really like guys get hit with body image stuff pretty regularly and have eating concerns. And so I think also noticing like, what are my friends' eating habits like? What are their exercise habits like? You know, might be just kind of signals or things that help you know, like, does this seem like it's a pretty typical behavior for people who are in college, or does this seem kind of out of the ordinary? And you don't have to make the determination as to whether it's problematic or not. You just have to see, like, is this something I want to maybe check in with them about how they're doing, you know? Other things that you might think about, and these are kind of on the more extreme end of things, but of course if somebody's like talking about killing themselves, you know, and I like, it seems like kind of lately part of the culture has been to kind of make jokes about like, well, I failed a test, I should just go kill myself. But clarifying like, is that sort of just like the saying, or do they really feel like I'm worthless, there's no hope, you know, I should die? Paying attention to things like, especially if they're talking like that, are they starting to like give things away or make other gestures that seems like they're kind of tying up loose ends and saying goodbye? That's not very common that it happens, but I think those are things to just kind of know that those might be markers of something's going on here. So those are some things to look for. So say that's happening in your life, right? Like you notice somebody stopped kind of interacting with people, or they're using substances a lot, or they're exercising maybe 4 or 6 hours a day, that kind of thing. Posting really sad things on Twitter. What do you do? Like, what are some things that you start thinking about and start being kind of concerned about? You mind grabbing the mic? I know it's awkward.
Maybe just sitting them down, see if they want to have dinner or have coffee. To just have one of those moments where you can touch base, to just like, hey, how you doing? Is there anything that I can do to help, so that they don't feel like they're by themselves and that there's someone that's there that cares.
Especially in the college setting, I live off campus and have access to a laundry room that you don't have to put quarters in. So something that I've done for some friends who have said some things or have made some comments like they're not doing super well, I'll ask them if they want to come over for dinner and do their laundry. So just to make sure that they're like cared for, and we'll like fold it together and stuff. So like being with them and making sure that they know that somebody does care about them is super important.
Cool. That's awesome that you have free laundry. Yeah. So I love that ideas about reaching out, checking in, letting people know they're not alone. They don't have to figure it out alone. Mm-hmm.
Another thing is finding, connecting them with resources. Yes, I know that for one of my friends, she was kind of down, and I was like, well, you know, they offer the free counseling services, like, so it's there. It's go like if you feel like you need someone that's like a non-biased party, like there's someone there. So being able to connect them to other resources on campus, even if you feel like it's probably over your head.
Sure. Yep. Definitely. I think one of the coolest things about K-State is we have so many resources. I'm not sure I've ever been on a college campus where there has been so much investment in students and student well-being. So connecting with us, connecting with Office of Student Life, even just an advisor you feel like, or a professor you feel like is trustworthy, or they feel like is trustworthy, for sure. Are there things that you've tried that maybe have worked well we haven't mentioned so far, or you've tried and it actually didn't work at all? Maybe you don't know why. We can try to figure out why it didn't work.
Some things, I guess, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, but trying to encourage them when they're in that place, when they're not doing well or they're thinking of killing themselves, sometimes encouraging them and like letting them know. It's usually like via text message or like a Facebook message that you'll get those things like, oh, hey, like I'm really not doing super well, and trying to encourage them. Sometimes it works and sometimes you feel like you make it worse and you don't really know what to say. So I think something that would be beneficial for us to learn today is like what things are appropriate to say in those times and what things are definitely not. As far as, I mean, because encouragement, you feel like those are all positive things that you're saying, but they can definitely exacerbate the situation.
Sure. And so when you're talking about encouragement, like what's the content of the encouragement? Like what are you encouraging them?
I guess that's a great question. Probably just like sort of letting them know that they are worthy, or like that they do have worth and that people do care about them, and sort of encouraging them in that way so that they can understand that people do love them and that their life has some purpose and it's good things. So
Yeah. That's a really good question. Are there other people who've had kind of shared experiences of tried to encourage them and I wanted to like let them know that like I do love you, I care about you, but it didn't feel like it was really sinking in?
I definitely feel like that, and also in the longer the times, like when you try to encourage people, like, yeah, but you have this going for you, and you have like that going for you, and sometimes like trying to like, I'm a big person of like, there's always like a positive, like even within the negative, and so when I try to encourage my friends, if I feel like they're down, I try to point out those things that they, oh, like you have this going for you, and you're really smart, and I feel like sometimes it reaches them, but then sometimes you may get that feeling like, oh, you're just saying that, or like you don't really know, like, is that the right thing to be doing in that moment of like of encouraging, like is this an effective method?
Sure. Do you have a sense for maybe what some of the, it sounds like the goal is like, I want to encourage you, I want to help you feel better. What gets in the way of that actually happening?
They're in that mental state where they don't want to do anything, they have the lack of energy and they don't feel joy, so they have a hard time crawling out of bed. And that's frustrating to see as a friend, how everything you're trying to do is kind of hitting this roadblock where they don't want to do anything.
Mm-hmm. For sure, yeah. Were you going to say something?
Yeah,
Kind of.
It's like the same thing she said. Just they get to a point sometimes where they're in that mindset where even if you tell them like, hey, this is what you have going for them, they'll respond with, yeah, but this is why that's not going to go well. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's hard to steer them back.
Sure.
So.
Yeah. And so that you know, like, your experiences are not because you're not skilled, right? Like, we have those experiences as therapists. Like, I have that experience in my personal life. I think anytime we see somebody we care about who's struggling, it's like our kind of intuition and our gut reaction is like, let me help you feel better. Let me help you cheer up. And it can be really frustrating when our intentions are good and it doesn't work, or it makes it worse. And it's like, how is it making it worse when I'm like reminding you of the good things about you? So know that you are not alone in those experiences by any means, you know. And also, I think sometimes it can be helpful to kind of tap into if you've ever been on the flip side, if you've ever had the time where you felt so crummy that you were kind of saying yes but to suggestions people were giving you, or dismissing their feedback of like, but you got this going for you and you're this and you're that, you know. If you've ever been on the flip side of that, can sometimes help kind of pull that empathy of like, yeah, when we feel like garbage, it can be really hard to find the positive things. It can be hard to do the things we know will be helpful, right? Like if you feel like down in the dumps, depressed, anxious because you haven't gone to class, well, going to class is probably going to help. But the thought of going to class also may be incredibly anxiety-provoking, especially if you've missed a week of class or something like that. So my hope is some of what I've prepared is going to talk about some of these things, and if we don't get it all the way fleshed out, like, let's keep talking about it. Okay? Are there other things? I guess I don't want to cut us off. Are there other things that feel like they haven't worked or you want to talk about and make sure we address?
You have friends that when they don't really feel like people care, but then like when you reach out, they're not really responsive to the, hey, do you want to come, like, can I come over? And like they don't text back, or like, do you want to come do this with me? And then like they're not responsive back, but then you don't want to feel like, okay, I don't want to stop responding because they're not responding, but I don't want to make them feel like I'm stalking them in type of way, because they're clearly not texting back. But like what to do in that moment when like, okay, I'm worried about you and I want to be here for you, but then like they're not like responsive. I feel like that's a big one that comes up with some of my friends.
Sure. Has anybody else had a similar experience? I'm worried about you, and you're not responding. Now I don't know what to do. I mean, I've definitely had that too, and I think it puts you in a tough situation of like you said, I don't want to quit responding, but I also don't want to badger you or bring up feelings of guilt when you already feel like garbage. Yeah. So let's also make sure we hit on that, because it can be really hard. These situations can be really tough to figure out what to do. Anything else that we need to touch on? Okay. Well, if it comes up, don't hesitate to bring it up. So to kind of start talking about the like what to do's, I thought I would share a video. Do y'all know who Brene Brown is? Have you ever heard of her? So Brene Brown is, she's got a PhD in social work. She's a professor at the University of Houston, and she does research primarily on like the topics of shame, vulnerability, forgiveness. She's got a couple of awesome TED Talks about vulnerability and shame. So if you like TED Talks, Brene Brown, here's how you spell it. Brene, and then brown, like the color. They're great TED Talks. So we are going to watch just a short, about 3-minute video that she put together on empathy. And I thought this would be a good place for us to start, because empathy, I think, is one of the most helpful things to start with, or like helpful tools to have in your toolbox when somebody is struggling. Partly because it breeds connection, and or cultivates connection, which is what she's going to talk about near the beginning. So we'll watch this and be thinking about like kind of what you took away from the video. We'll discuss it. If there are things that she talked about that you'd never really thought of, or that kind of had never occurred to you before, those are things we can talk about then. And also how it maybe fits as you're starting to think about being peer educators and friends with folks who are struggling.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you can climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh! It's bad, no. You want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with "at least." And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, "I don't even know what to say right now. I'm just so glad you told me." Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
All right. Here's the pause button. All right. So I feel like she touched on some of the stuff that we just talked about, the stuff that does and that doesn't work. But I'm curious to hear your reactions to it. And there's like a ton packed into 3 minutes, so let me know if you feel like we need to watch it again. Because I take different stuff out of it every time I watch it, and I've watched it probably 20 times.
Valuable that she said that response doesn't make things better and connection does, because I think that was something that we were all sort of stating. Like, we tried to respond in a helpful way and try to make things better when maybe that's not what they're looking for, and they just need someone to connect with them. So I think something valuable in the peer education class we're taking, and like through the other cat chats, and possibly this one, is learning how to better connect with people instead of trying to perfect our response.
Yeah. That piece about the response, really response make things better. Whenever I hear it, it's like, oh yeah, thank you. Because I think also there's a piece of like, rarely can we come up with advice that's going to solve somebody's problems that they already, that they haven't already come up with, right? I think it's really easy to be like, oh, you're depressed, like you haven't gotten out of bed, well, pull yourself up, set your alarms, make yourself get up, and it's like, they probably know how to get out of bed on time and how to get themselves to class, and there's something bigger than just the reminder to set their alarm or make sure their roommate wakes them up going on. Yeah, I love that one line where she says that. Mm-hmm. What else?
I like the fact that she started off.
Did it turn on? Okay, got it.
I like the fact that she started off with the kind of breaking down the difference between sympathy and empathy, because I feel like before starting the social work major, I thought that they were kind of the same thing, mm-hmm. But then understanding like the fundamental difference of like being sympathetic for somebody and being empathetic with somebody makes a huge deal of difference. And so I like that she mentioned that empathy is all about, okay, I've been here before, like, I'm just going to be here with you because I understand your feelings, and not like, oh, okay, well, what can I do to make you feel better? And I think that is something that I was struggling with, of like, okay, being able to remember that it's not necessarily about making them feel better, but being there with them while they're not feeling better.
Right, while they're feeling crummy. Yeah, and I love that you used the word for when you were talking about sympathy, and with when you were talking about empathy, because I think when I think of the word sympathy, I think of people saying things like, I feel bad for you, and pity, and nobody wants to be pitied, right? And so really that being like, I'm with you, like, this situation totally sucks, right? And I'm going to be here with you, even while it sucks, you know, even if the friend is like not a fun friend to be with while it sucks, you know, but being there with them instead of keeping that distance like, ooh, that's a dumpster fire, like, ew, right? It's like, okay, let's be in this dumpster fire together. Yeah. Other things that stood out for people? Yeah.
Line, I don't know what to say, but I'm glad you told me. It really stuck out for me because I had a friend who experienced a death in the family, and I haven't experienced a death in the family, and so I wanted to connect with her, but it was really hard, and so I wish I knew what to say back then, but now I know. So I think that's a good piece of advice to know.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. That one hung with me too the first time I listened to it. Other things that stuck out to people? I think she went through it really fast, but one of the things that kind of goes with the empathy piece is the reminder of those 4 components of empathy, right? So being able to perspective take, like what's going on for this person and what might it feel like to be in that person's shoes, or what did I feel like when I've been in that person's shoes, if you have. Being non-judgmental, she blew by that kind of quickly, but I think that is really important. It's really easy for us to judge. We do it all the time, right? If you start to pay attention to judgments, you'll see yourself do it to yourself and other people constantly. And it's all these messages we have about what's right or wrong or good or bad, or the way that we're supposed to feel versus the way we actually feel, or the way we're supposed to act versus actually act. Being able to recognize emotions and being able to communicate that recognition of emotion and communicate your own emotions in that situation. Even if those emotions are like, I'm lost, but I want to be here with you. I care about you. And I think the emotion piece can be tough too, because we don't always talk about or express emotions. Yeah?
Can you, so I make sure I got the right 4? It's being able to see it from their perspective, non-judgmental, and then recognize.
Yeah, and then the last one is communicating, like that recognition of emotion and communicating emotion. So, yep. Kind of tied together. Maybe it should be 3A and 3B. So, yeah. So if you type in, if you want to watch that video again, you can always find it on here, but also if you type in Brene Brown empathy, that's how it'll come up on YouTube or Google or whatever. And that reminder, we didn't talk about the silver lining piece. She used it as a verb, silver lining it. But it's so easy to kind of pull those at least out, or like, look on the bright side. You know? And that sometimes that's not quite as helpful because it keeps that distance there versus like, let's just be in this together. So, okay. So some more listening skills. She kind of got us kicked off. One thing I think is really important is to listen without thinking about your response. So it is so easy when someone is talking, and you can use this in every situation, so easy when somebody's talking to already be preparing your response. What am I going to say? And that can help us deal with our anxiety, because then it's like, okay, now when they're done talking, I'm super prepared with what I'm going to say. The problem is that our brains don't do that all that well. They don't think about what we're going to say and keep listening, right? So as soon as you start thinking, you're going to miss some of what's going on for the person. So even though it can feel a little nerve-wracking, especially at first, I encourage you to try to just listen to what the person is saying. And know that it's totally fine if you say like, wow, this is a lot. And I just need a minute to kind of take it all in and organize my thoughts, you know. There have been plenty of times where I've said, I have like 4 things crashing in my head right now, and so I need to just figure out what I want to say first. And that's okay to do. Trying not to interrupt. This can differ by culture. So some cultures interrupting is fine or expected. And some cultures interrupting is seen as really rude. So kind of paying attention to your own cultural background, what you've been taught, the person's cultural background if you know it. A couple of things about nonverbals, right? So even if you're not communicating with your mouth and your words, you're still communicating. So if somebody's telling you something that's really difficult for them to share and they're being vulnerable, and you're sitting there like this, that's going to create a really different vibe and say something really different if your arms are crossed, you're not making eye contact, or maybe your body's turned away, versus keeping your body open. And in a lot of cultures, leaning forward shows like, I'm here, I'm with you, and I'm engaged. So thinking about what your body language is telling the person. This bullet point about emotions goes back to what she was talking about with empathy. So try not to be afraid of the emotions that come up. And sometimes when somebody is struggling, the emotions that come up are really strong. They might be really scary or overwhelming. The person themselves might feel scared or overwhelmed. They might be sadder than anybody you've ever encountered before, or angrier than anybody you've ever encountered before. So I think it's important to remember that no emotion, no matter how intense it is going to kill you, right? It's not going to do you any harm. It might be really, really difficult, but it's not going to hurt you. Actions, totally different story. Actions can be harmful. But it's okay to sit there and be with that emotion, whatever emotion's coming up for them and whatever emotion's coming up for you. So try not to be afraid of it and try not to change it. I think one of the times we get in the most trouble in relationships is when we're trying to change somebody else's emotion. So they're feeling really sad and we're trying to cheer them up, or they're feeling really anxious and we're trying to calm them down. That's just not how emotions work. We can't actually change them. So try to just stick with them, whatever they are in the moment. And then I always like to start by asking people what they need. So sometimes people aren't going to know what they need. But if you're listening, being aware of what's happening for you, seeing what's happening for them, and then say, like, what do you need from me right now? Or what would be helpful? Because sometimes people do need advice or some problem solving. There was a time in grad school where I was totally overwhelmed, and I needed to take the train from where I was at school to Chicago, and they were working on the tracks. So there was no train coming to my town. And I got so overwhelmed and freaked out, and I couldn't figure out what I was going to do. And I had to call my partner and just say, help me figure out how to solve this. Right? That's what I need is some problem solving right now. I need to get on the train, and it's not coming here. And then we figured out, okay, it's coming 45 minutes away, so just drive the 45 minutes and get on the train. So if they need problem solving and you feel like you've got some ideas, great. If they tell you, actually what I need right now is just somebody to listen, great, you can listen. So I always start with asking them what would be helpful, instead of jumping into problem solving mode or jumping into advice giving, okay? Offering support and validation. Do y'all know what I mean when I say validation? Anybody know? You're given a head nod. You want to be our definition person? You can say no, too. It's okay.
Ask the question.
Yeah, so when I say validation, what does that mean? What am I talking about?
I'm going to take a guess at it. I mean, I think
Sure.
when I think of validation is just if there's a problem, hey, I did this, this, and this, and I just need someone to confirm that, I'm not going crazy. This was an okay way to deal with it, because I know sometimes when I get really stressed out, I'll call my mom and I'm like, okay, this happened, and I feel like this is what I did, and I know I can't take it back, but someone tell me that at least my thought process was valid or okay and not way off base.
Sure. I feel like that was a great example.
When I hear validation, I think it's making sure that they know that what they're dealing with is I don't know how to phrase it. Don't make them think that they don't have a problem. Don't try to say, oh, it's not as big of a deal as you're making it. You'll be fine. Right. I think they want to know that how they're reacting is okay and healthy.
Yeah.
If it is.
Yeah. It kind of sounds like what you're saying is it's sort of the opposite of minimizing.
Yeah.
It's saying this is legit. Yeah. You want to jump in?
I think something also that's been helpful for dealing with some like instances where friends have contacted me is letting them know that it's okay to have the emotions that they're having at that time, because sometimes people are like, well, I don't know why I'm so sad, and I don't want to be sad, and I want to do these things. Like, sometimes you have to process it, and like you have to work through it before it gets better. And so I think it's probably important to validate their emotions too. Like, it's going to be hard for a little bit, but like, you got to work through it, sort of thing. But in like an encouraging way. You don't say that right out probably, but you know.
Yeah. I think you all have encompassed validation really well, right? It's basically saying what's happening for you is legitimate, it's real, you know, here's the truth I can see in what you're saying. So it might be validating somebody's thought process, that like, or their actions, that like, that made sense in the context you were in. It might be just acknowledging like, this is a real problem. Even if it seems small on the huge scale of the world's problems, it's still a problem and it's yours, and that's troubling. And it's about validating people's emotions. You know, I think often we question our emotions. Why do I feel like this? I shouldn't feel like this. And it's important to know that emotions are raw data. So when something happens to us, the first thing that happens is we have an emotional reaction. And so that emotional reaction, like, you can't change it. It's just a response. And so even if we don't understand the emotional response, it's still important to pay attention to and validate, like, okay, like, this crappy interaction happened and now I feel really sad. Even if I hate that person, you know, it might be easy to say, like, I hate that person, why am I sad? It's like, well, there's something going on there that feels sad about. We just have to figure out what it is. So, yeah. So validating all of those things and recognizing your experience, your lived experience is real, and it's important. And then remembering to be non-judgmental. So we talked about that with Brene Brown's video. And then also being honest, right? And so I say this in the context of particularly, like, if you've had a shared experience with that person or you've had a similar experience, then I think it can be helpful sometimes to say, here, this was my experience, but remembering to keep the focus on that person and not making it about you. Also, if you haven't had the experience, don't pretend that you have, right? Don't make something up. Just say, like, if you don't have a clue what it's like, it's okay to say, like, I have no idea what it's like for you to go through this, and I care about you, and I want to be here for you. So, yeah. So those are some things that I think can be helpful. Are there other ideas? Yeah.
This is more of a question.
Sure.
I have a thing that I do that I'm a big person on perspective, and that everybody's reality is different, and that what I like to tell people sometimes is that I may not agree with your conclusion. I may not agree with what the final product was, but I can agree with the premise that got you to that conclusion. Like, I may not be like, I can understand how your thought process got you there, even if I don't agree with it. So I try not to sound judgmental, like, okay, I don't agree with those actions, but at the same time, I'm not discrediting what you felt and how your thought process got you there. Is that a good thing to do? Is that a bad way to say that?
What do you all think? What would it be like for you to be in that situation? Or even for you, like, if the roles were switched and somebody said that to you? Do you have a sense of what that might be like?
I think a lot of times I'm okay if people don't agree with me. Like, I'm okay that even if you think my actions are wrong, but what I don't like is when people don't try to understand why that would make sense to me. Like, why I'm like, because I think that people are in different realities, and that the way you perceive what happened in your reality is different than mine. So I would like for people, especially in with my friends, I would like for people to try to understand that though you may not agree with my conclusion and what I did, but you could agree with my thought process and why that made sense to me. So for me, I personally feel like that would be a good thing, but I think everyone's different. So
which is kind of at the core of what you're talking about. Yeah. Other thoughts about it?
I think it's probably valuable to try to understand the place where somebody is, and like if they did something that was bad, you can say, well, like, that wasn't a great thing for you to do, or you don't have to say that to them directly depending on the context of the situation. Anyway, so like understanding like where they were and how they got to where they were, I think that is valuable, and like depending on context, like telling them like, hey, like, maybe we should talk about why you did the thing that you did, and like how can we like prevent that from happening in the future, or like can we get you some help or something. It is also, I think it's important to like stay somewhat relative. I'm not going to like propose moral relativism, but I think there are some things that are kind of flexible, depending on like if it didn't hurt someone, like where do you have the authority to draw the line on what's okay and what's not okay, sort of thing. So I think it's a sticky situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so. I'm a big believer in that. In a lot of situations, I think we can say even things that are really, really hard to say, but the way we say them is really what makes the difference, you know? So I think you could say that same message and have it come across really poorly and have it come across really well, you know? And it probably depends on who you're saying it to, you know, what the relationship is like with that person and what it's about. So there's probably not a hard and fast rule like this is good or bad, or it's right or wrong, you know? I'm also a big believer in that there's wisdom in everybody's actions. Whatever we do, there's some wisdom in it. We just have to figure out what that is. And sometimes it can look pretty ugly, you know. The situation was really ugly and that brought out some really ugly actions or thoughts. So it's not always the most graceful thing, but that we're all kind of doing the best we can, and that there's some wisdom in what everybody's doing, even if it doesn't make sense on the surface. So that's my personal belief. So, but I think probably whatever you say, how you say it, you know, matters a lot. And yeah, and paying attention to the impact, because I also think there's a difference too between intention and impact, you know, so we can intend something to be really supportive, which you talked about, but the impact doesn't show up that way. So it's honoring kind of both of those, recognizing like, ooh, crap, I meant to be really helpful, and by the look on their face, it appears I was not helpful at all. And so then it's responding to the impact of the person. So if you say that and it goes over well, it's like, great. If you say that and it doesn't go over well, then it's like checking in. Okay, what happened? What message did you hear when I say this? How are we doing right now? That kind of thing. I think that can be helpful follow-ups, you know. So, yeah, good question. Others? Cool. Oh, dang, time is flying. So another thing I think it's important to remember is that when you're in a stressful situation, if you have a friend or significant person in your life who's struggling, it's also important to take care of yourself. You know, so I think about who's supporting you and how are you supporting you. So tapping into your own support resources. And I like this graphic. It's called like the ring theory of support. And basically the gist of it is put comfort in. So the person at the center is the person who's struggling. So anytime you're getting closer and closer to that circle or that person, you want to be putting comfort in that direction. But anytime you're turning outwards, that's where you're doing your venting. So say your roommate or your best friend is really struggling and it's really stressful to you. She or he is not the person to tell that that's really stressful. But maybe your own parent is the person to tell, like, this is really stressful for me that my roommate is struggling so much, or my best friend is struggling so much. So does that make sense in kind of being mindful about, like, you want to get support, but being deliberate about who you get that support from. And then just remembering to take care of yourself physically, mentally, and emotionally. So getting sleep, the amount of sleep you normally get or need to get, making sure you're eating the foods that help your body feel good, doing the exercise that you enjoy and that feels like fun for you, which doesn't have to mean like going for a 30-minute run. It might be like, I really like dancing in my room, or I really like gardening, or whatever. It's like doing the physical activity that you enjoy. And remembering to play. That can be hard to remember to do, especially when you're taking classes and maybe working and having a friend who's struggling. But playing is really important for stress relief. So, and then the last bit is about resources for support. And there is a lot on this slide. So one of the resources that we have at Counseling Services is a program called At Risk. It's an online computer program, and you go through different modules, and you kind of play an avatar, and that avatar is working with students who are struggling. And I think it's a great training tool for learning what things are helpful to say in these situations, even more ideas than we've talked about, and what things aren't so helpful. So you get to like, here's the student's concern, here are different things I could say, and then it'll give you feedback about like, oh, here's why it wouldn't be so helpful to say that option, or yeah, here's why we would want you to say this one. And also we're gonna do 3 cat chats, so I put the dates up there, 3 cat chats with training about the At-Risk program and information about the At-Risk program. So there's one for just students in general, there's one for students who are veterans, and then one for students who identify as LGBTQ. So that's who the training is geared towards. Anybody can attend the training, but it's like, what are some things I could say that would be helpful to a student who's a veteran and maybe having PTSD or flashbacks or something like that. Another thing you can do, the Feel Better Fast workshops might be helpful for you if you're in a stressful situation. They might be helpful for your friends to go to. So these are free workshops. They're run every week for most of the semester. They'll start next week. They're free. They're through Counseling Services, but we're going to offer them over in the Leadership Studies building. So you can get on our website and look at the dates and times of the presentations. It's a 4-week workshop. You can start and stop at any point in there. The website tells about the 4 different modules. But it's also a cool thing if your friend is struggling and it feels like it might be helpful for them to go, like you could go with them, you know. And I've had lots of people who have gone with their friends to that. And honestly, the skills that are taught in there would be helpful for anyone, whether you're struggling or not. The Office of Student Life is an office on campus that they're basically there to help advocate for students and help problem solve when students are encountering stuff that like gets in the way of successfully completing school. And they have a student of concern button on their website. So that graphic up there in the corner, if you go to the Office of Student Life webpage, that's up in the corner. You just click on that if there's somebody that you're like, hey, I want them to check in on this person, but maybe I don't feel like I have a relationship with them where I can suggest going to the Office of Student Life or something like that. You can just let the university know, hey, Susie Q, whatever, I'm concerned about her, so that campus can kind of have that on our radar. We're a resource at Counseling Services. If it feels like it would be helpful for you to come in and talk through a specific situation and say, like, for this situation, what should I do? Come into our office, and we can talk through what's going on and help try to figure out a plan that would be helpful. You can walk your friend over if you're like, I really think you should go to counseling, or it might be helpful, and they're kind of open, but maybe they're scared to come by themselves. Feel free to walk over with them. If it's an emergency, we can see them that same day. Or you can just help them get an appointment, because tons of people have, you know, like this first time moving out of your house, like you may have never made an appointment for yourself before. If it's an emergency, you can call our phone number 24/7. It gets answered even at 3 o'clock in the morning on Christmas Day, right? Holidays, weekends, middle of the night, the phone gets answered. You can call suicide hotlines. There's also a text line now, so if you're in a situation where you can't talk on the phone, but you can text, the text line is there, and you can find all of this on the emergencies link on our webpage too. Or you can call 911 or go to the emergency room with the person who's struggling. We already talked about talking with faculty or staff, if it's an RA, if you live in the dorms, or an RLC, or an advisor, maybe for a student club or something like that. They can be resources. Parents, whether it's your friend's parents or your parents. I think it's important to know that when somebody's struggling and they're coming to you, like, you also don't have to be alone in figuring out what to do. It's okay to tap resources, and there are lots at your disposal. So Any other ideas, maybe resources you know about that I didn't get up here, or things as we wrap up that we kind of feels like a loose end that we haven't tied up? All right. Well, like I said at the beginning, I'm Missy. I'm from Counseling Services, so you're more than welcome if you have a follow-up thought or question to touch base with me through Counseling Services. And of course, we're always a resource if you happen to encounter a time where a friend is struggling. So, cool. Well, thanks for coming today. That's what I've got. All right.